Hello and welcome to episode 6 of ATF, After the Fire, a firefighter line of duty death podcast brought to you by the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation in collaboration with firefightersskills.com. I'm your host, Jon Nelson. Today in episode 6, we continue right where we left off in episode 5, discussing the 2019 McMicken Incident of Surprise, Arizona, that nearly claimed the lives of multiple firefighters when a lithium-ion battery energy storage facility exploded. Our panel today consists of the Director of Fire Service Programs for the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, Chief Jon Tippett, Peoria, Arizona Fire Chief and Emergency Manager Instructor at Arizona State University, Chief Bobby Ruiz, Surprise Fire Medical Fire Chief and 30-plus year International Association of Firefighters Instructor, Chief Tom Abbott, Surprise Fire Medical Fire Marshal, Keith Tanner, and the captain of the first arriving company on scene for this event, Surprise Fire Medical Captain and Paramedic, Shawn Marty. So without further ado, let's go into episode 6, part 2 of the 2019 McMicken Incident of Surprise, Arizona. I would like to, if you guys wouldn't mind, touch on what actually caused this explosion. If that was ever truly determined. I know, Chief Abbott, you said there's a couple of contradictory reports, and perhaps you want to speak to that as far as the APS versus internal investigations.
Well, I'll defer a little bit to Fire Marshal Keith Tanner on that one. He has a much better understanding of the process than I do.
So part of the fire investigation, and this has taken an incredible amount of time. They've been very, very diligent about the declassification, the decommissioning of the container, in particular of the rack, the entire rack, to disassemble it. They know going in that there's going to be lawsuits. We understand that as well. So it's been a long, tedious process. But at the end of the day, the Arizona Public Service announced that they believe their SME called it a single battery that failed. And keep in mind, in these battery energy storage units and the modules and these racks, there's thermal sensing going on. It's a pretty robust system as far as battery management goes, because they're looking at temperature primarily. And so you have thermocouples placed throughout the rack. And so they demonstrated through looking at the data that it was narrowed down to one particular area in a module, which cascaded the thermal runaway into adjacent modules. But what was interesting in this case with the clean agent that was used, and it did deploy, it appears to have at least mitigated thermal runaway aspect of it. So it was simply contained to one rack. Again, Arizona Public Service called it a battery. Battery manufacturer said, no, we have proof that it's some other cause. So I would say still at the end of the day, the exact cause, we may not ever know. When you look at these incidents, it comes down to just two or three things. It's either the battery itself, a design issue or manufacturing issue. It can also be an installation issue. So there can be any number of causes that might lead to a single battery overheating and causing immediately adjacent batteries to overheat as well and become involved. I don't know if we'll ever really know exactly what caused that first initial point of origin, whether it was installation or manufacturing. I don't know. That's still ongoing, I would say. The third-party investigators and all the engineers and their big names. I don't know if we'll ever get to that point.
Well, we hope that if you guys do get further information on it, get some concrete determinations or discoveries, please share that with us so we can do follow-ups on this episode and continue that educational component. How about direct takeaways? Talk about some of the lessons learned and how things have evolved since that incident for responding to these things, mitigating these hazards. Fire Marshal Tanner stated, we may not be able to prevent it, but we can mitigate it. As far as boots on the ground go, what's changed there?
I think a lot has changed. We've done a lot of work, a lot of researchers being UT Austin, American engineering, technical engineering, and the NFPA and UL. And we've done some live burns and stuff with batteries. And I think one of the things that we've learned is white fog equals electrolyte and a lots of it. And electrolyte being very flammable. And one of the guesses is that you have the thermal runaway, you have the heat source there within the battery, and that you don't even need the oxygen to cause, according to the APS report, to cause an issue once the electrolyte and all the explosive gases are there. One of the common thoughts is that it doesn't take many batteries to fill a container up with electrolyte and get above the UEL. And we know that once you get above UEL, just about anything you do is going to result in an explosion.
UEL meaning upper explosive limit.
The upper explosive limit, I'm sorry. And once you reach that, it's only going to go in one direction, which is down into the explosive ranges. And so surmised that in this container, it got filled up and went above the upper explosive limit. And that when they opened the door, that it wasn't so much what they let in, so much air, although that may have been a contributing factor, but it was more what they let out. And one of the guesses is that all they did by opening the door was speed up the explosion. If they would have just left it alone, eventually it would have come below the upper explosive limit into the ranges. And then you have your thermal or hot heat spot there within the battery itself, and it would have exploded as one of the theories of many of the researchers. So one of the things that I've discussed a lot with the researchers is that the only way to prevent it is to have very early an exhaust system that will evacuate any of the gases very, very early on, because it fills up right away. So with that, there's a lot of new technology as far as battery management systems that go in rack and detect very, very early on, that can also kick on ventilation system and exhaust out some of the gases early on, because once you fill it up, it's probably too late. The ventilation system is going to do the same thing as what happened with them opening the door, is just going to bring it down into the explosive ranges. The other thing is water seems to be the best cooling agent and best protector. There was a study done by one of the companies, I can't remember the name of it, but they showed that Novak, to bring it down from 1,000 Celsius to 100 Celsius, took about 80 minutes. Water, on the other side, only took 6 minutes to bring it down from the same temperatures. So there's a lot of studies been done with the waters versus the clean agents. The clean agents, even APS kind of concluded that it extinguished the external flames, but may have not done anything for the runaway. And certainly, as Tanner said, it may have kept the propagation from going sideways, but it didn't do anything from it going directly up, because it took out pretty much the whole rack and about 14 modules that were in that rack. So those are some of the thoughts, some of the experiments still going on. These explosions have been kind of replicated by a couple of the research firms, smaller scale and almost at full scales also. So I think we're getting there, and the technology is getting there. I think by the time we figure it out, the technology is going to change. NFPA came out with their study. They talked about doing a lot of training with fire folks, which we agree with. One of the things that I emphasized to them that they didn't really emphasize, even though they mentioned it, they didn't emphasize the need to train the utility SMEs, because they're electricians, they're not chemists. You almost need chemical engineers in order to really know what's going on with these designs.
I can understand, personally, the apprehension if I were placed in Captain Marty's spot of putting water on an electrical situation. Captain Marty, if you could speak to that at all, given the hindsight now that putting water on this particular incident may have cooled it.
That would have cooled it, I think, from a sprinkler application. But the problem is to do it from direct attack with my hose, I have to. I guess we could have got creative and done it maybe a number of other ways with piercing nozzles or something crazy like that. But let's be honest, the most direct route in firefighting, we're going to open that door to spray water, and then we're in the process of opening the door to a room filled with hydrogen cyanide. So I don't think that we had the capability, nor looking backwards, could I have done it any different with water application without exposing my crews to toxic chemicals. Because we talk about hydrogen cyanide, it's transdermal. Your mask and your helmet's not going to protect you from it. It's going to go through your skin. And then of course it's hydrogen fluoride that's in there too. So if we had a connection, some form of a connector to connect to support a sprinkler system or something, or even a dry pipe system that we roll up and connect to, would have been good.
Cap, boots on the ground, what takeaways, lessons learned did you come away from this?
Well, incrementalism is a problem, but that's not really a takeaway or a lesson learned. That's something where honestly I knew beforehand, and yet incrementalism dragged us here. Not that it made a huge impact on the outcome of the incident, because I think decisions made, if I'd had a second alarm hazmat on that scene, would have been the same decisions. The people that that would have been involved in that decision making made the same decisions. But at the end of the day, we were kind of lucky, or we were lucky that two of those guys were able to get up and walk out on their own. And what I meant by incrementalism is where we ended up is because of the way we started off. Walking into if you had a clear cut, when I pulled up to that container, that a giant sign that said dangerous hazmat. Well, of course, I'm going to call the first alarm hazmat, and we would have had that throughout the duration of that incident. But the way that incident started off, brush fire, to it's a box filled with smoke that this guy says is not really anything, to hey, just give me a hazmat team so I can make a decision, so I can get some meters and make a better decision. At the time we got readings, we could probably balance it up. But again, at the same time, we weren't talking about making entries at that point. We're just looking at a box that we had everything we needed for the posture we were in that moment. If I was back, at that point, I'm calling for more of a hazmat. Or at the time that we're sending people, we're talking about even going into meter any area to have not just appropriate resources to put water on stuff or to make, but stack on stack, rescue team set up in depth would have been nice, because you're talking about pulling 4 guys out. You need at least 2 guys per guy, if not more, really more. At the same time, we were never talking about a position where we're like, we're outside the building, the entire time. Again, hindsight, going back to basics and having decontamination, appropriate addressed, and who's going to make my rescue and how many crews do I need for that, limiting the people we sent in the hot zone. So when we sent them in, and it made sense at the time, hey, I'm going to split my crew, and one crew is going to be backup team, and 2 guys are going in, and 2 guys are going to be on a hose line. Well, that makes sense if you keep 2 guys out of any blast. And I don't think any of us were thinking this thing was going to explode. It catch on fire, but you still have to limit people for unknown. You don't know what you don't know. So you keep your 2 people outside. It's a limit who's going to go in and meter. And I think creep might have been a process there too, because I don't know why the hose line was forward where it was that all of them would take that blast. There's little critiques that can be made, but those lessons really aren't new lessons. They're old lessons that we all should know.
Do you think the position of where they were when they opened the door and continued to take readings and thermal imaging cameras and stuff, had they been in a different spot, do you think that would have changed anything, like not directly in front of the door?
It was a metal-clad building, solid steel, but yet it bowed out about 6 inches with the explosion. And it ripped off the one man door on the side. Did it blow out the one in the back? No, I don't think it did. But the one on the side, it blew it completely off the hinges. And that door was up against the fence. That those 2 guys, Justin and Hunter, were blown underneath that chain link fence the door was jammed up and wedged into that chain link fence, and they went underneath it and went out 50 some feet from there.
Chief, do you have anything else to add as far as lessons learned or revisiting some of the thought processes that go along with calls like this?
I would add into it everything, reiterate everything that Chief Ruiz said and Captain Marty. But ultimately, as the technology improves and as the demand for the ability to store electricity is going to continually increase, we're already seeing these battery energy storage systems, the best systems, tied into solar panel systems in residential settings. So you could encounter, as firefighters, these batteries and the modules, I should say, inside garages. And at some point, our code actually allowed them for inside a residential area in closets. When Fire Marshal Tanner will talk about that, that's one of the amendments we're going to be making shortly, is that we're not going to allow them anywhere inside a livable space. It's going to be inside a garage. From a political process, I wanted to move those batteries exterior only, not inside even a garage. Because now if you have a car fire or any other kind of fire in a garage, the heat can cause the cascading effect inside the battery module system inside the garage. So the battery may not be directly the cause of an incident. Something else could cause that battery to go into failure. The flip side of that is the battery itself can go into a cascading effect. One battery inside the module goes bad, and now you start producing them. Now you have a garage fire filled with the toxic gases, the production of hydrogen, hydrogen fluoride, all the different gases that come off of one of those units inside a garage. So we're going to encounter those kind of systems in just garage fires, inside house fires. Then the utility grade, what we're seeing now is not only the big boxes that we've been describing with the McMicken site, you're going to start seeing those individual units inside what will appear to be just a transformer box alongside the road. So it's going to be just a small utility type transformer box that you won't think anything of, and not realize that when you open up the exterior doors, it's filled with these battery modules. And it's not switching gear or transformer equipment. It's actually energy storage systems, battery modules there. We already found one in North Phoenix that is right in front of an elementary school. So it's kind of the predictable event here, predictable surprise is that, you've got that big, large container. You look at it and think, it's not a big deal. It almost looks like a traffic light switching gear. Don't realize that on the inside, it's filled with a rack of modules of lithium-ion batteries. They could fail at any given point in time. It could be an installation malfunction. It could be a manufacturing malfunction. The process of going through a winter and summer, you start building dendrites, which is a direct short between the cathode and the anode inside one of the individual cells. That shorts out, causes cascading effect now that affects the other batteries in there. Now you're producing all these gases right there in any given situation, whether it's inside a residential structure, inside one of these boxes, or a large-scale utility box that we've encountered at McMicken. McMicken was only a 2-megawatt system. Salt River Project, which is the other utility company here, SRP, APS, Arizona Public Service, they're looking at building 10, 20, and 100 megawatt facilities. They're actually looking at one in a little community in between Peoria and Surprise. They're talking 200 megawatts. Capture that much energy will require 2 buildings, each large enough where you could put a football field inside the building. That's how large these buildings are going to be. And they're capturing solar power, they're capturing excess energy production during the daytime. The peak times in the evenings, they're going to start supplementing the grid with these batteries. So it's an inevitable situation. We have to have these systems, but we have to be very much aware that where we're going to encounter them as firefighters, it's going to be from residential to inside of basements, in large commercial buildings, capturing the excess energy. We're going to see them all over the place, and we have to know and recognize what they are and what the potential hazards are.
It almost sounds like a PSA, a public service announcement of some sort, to try to let people know, hey, if you're going to go down this path and install these things in your residence, let the fire department know. Just kind of we're all in this together. I don't even know how in the world you would find out about all of these. Chief Jameson said in our last episode, a man's home is his castle. He can do whatever he wants. If they want to put this kind of stuff all over their basement, how do we even know if it's actually there?
I'll add one real quick thing to that. The UK, we've talked to a couple of professors. They have found that people are doing a black market system for these batteries, and what they're doing is like an electric vehicle, whether it's a Leaf or a Tesla, whatever it is, if they get in an accident, they're capturing those batteries and salvaging them, sending them off to China, getting them refurbished, sent back into Europe, and then obviously the United States, and packaged as new batteries. And when in reality, they could very well have damage from the accidents, et cetera. We're also finding them in attics, in homes where somebody's grabbed one of those batteries, recycled it or repurposed it to store energy for a home use, putting it up in an attic to supplement power for somebody else. So we're going to see all these things inevitably cause us more risk and hazard in the future.
But I would like to, again, draw attention to the overall approach to this whole event, and again, compliment the captain on his situational awareness. He goes out for smoke in the area, thinks he has a brush fire, determines very quickly he's got something beyond that. He does a very systematic approach to this incident, as opposed to what we have seen in other events where firefighters have gone into situations thinking they have more of a handle on the situation than they actually do. So I think one of the strong lessons to walk away from this event is to make sure that you're listening to your internal warning system, your internal risk management system that says, I'm seeing what's happening here, but I don't necessarily agree with what's going on here. Let me take a second and take another sense to evaluate it. Make sure my risk management profile is equaling what I think I need to do here. I also think there's some elements there where, again, going back to what he was getting over the phone, giving information that is not as bad as you think it is, but something is telling him it is. So listen to what your gut is telling you is one of the things we've learned from some of our previous studies of human behavior. Klein talked about recognition prime decision making. If you've never experienced this event, you try to find something you can fit that profile, but that may not work exactly right. So being aware of what's going on there, given the same set of circumstances, we could have all walked down the same path and maybe not have had as good an outcome. His initial actions is what set the tone for this to end up being a near miss versus a fatality. If he'd shown up and he'd gone in there, broken the door down right away to fight the fire, we'd have probably ended up with 4 fatalities and a huge hole in the ground. So I think hats off to him. Good call on getting command established. Good call on getting hazmat involved there. And as Chief Abbott has laid out, these technologies are going to be showing up in places we didn't anticipate. So we should always be on the alert for something that doesn't look right. And again, even within the industry, getting the bad information about there's halon in the building. Well, a good number of the fire service probably recognizes that halon's not around anymore, but here are the experts, quote unquote, telling us that this agent has discharged into this building, and we know that's not true. That should become a clue that they may not be as up to speed on of their own industry, and we're relying on them for good information.
Fire Marshal Tanner, if you would walk us through where code was and where code evolved to now, and some of the things that you guys have talked about kind of in the works.
I'll tell you, what an exciting time, and I mean this, what an exciting time to be in code development with new technology. It's just really exciting. It's something new. It's an emerging technology, and it's It's not going anywhere. It's going to stay, and it's going to be more prevalent. Again, as Chief Tippett mentioned, we're going to see it in different places that we never even thought of. When we talk about lessons learned from this incident, we reflect back on where we were, and there really simply wasn't anything on the radar in the 2012 code that we were under at the time. It's no reflection on the code base. It's what we knew. We follow what a lot of jurisdictions do. We do code revisions every other cycle, so about every 6 years. So coming out of the 12 code, there really wasn't anything on the radar about anything along these lines. So, but there were some areas where it was required, and certain things were required that just didn't hit the mark. Fast forward at post-incident, we had a lot of lessons learned in taking the 21 International Fire Code, bringing in the expertise from the cadre of people that we had interaction with. And I'll say that we didn't write the code. We came up with a revision for Chapter 12, and it was a group effort, really, regional group effort, Phoenix, Peoria, Surprise, and it was a collaborative effort. And again, taking the incident, I guess, as a kind of dissecting it. Well, what if we did this, and what if we did that? Listening to what studies had shown for what kind of density would we need for a sprinkler system to even work. So it was a compilation, and we're happy to share that. We'll give our contact information out. We're happy to share it. We didn't necessarily author the meat and potatoes of the code revision to Chapter 12 that exists today. We've done just some minor local tweaks that we'll be doing soon. The code was assembled and adopted, I want to say October of 19 here in Surprise. And so just some highlights. I'm telling you, from a code standpoint, it's actually kind of exciting, but I know other people don't necessarily share that same excitement. But and I get that. But again, think about why we're here is for the safety of the public and definitely for safety of our firefighter brothers. So one of the big things that we took away from the incident was about permits. We had no idea that this facility was there. Had we have known, we would have required a permit for the detection system and the suppression system. That's a normal thing. We would have required monitoring, 24-hour monitoring, so that we're not relying on a third party or whoever owns the building to send us that alarm. We're going to get it automatically. So that's one of the big areas that we've added in the code. Just in, again, we're part of the auto aid system. So we respond all day, every day with neighboring jurisdictions. So we want some similarity. We train the same. We want some similarity in our code. So one of the things that we're looking for, this covers battery energy storage units, this Chapter 12 does. It's energy system. It covers battery energy storage, and it also covers solar PV. And so we're looking for signage. That was another thing that Captain Marty mentioned was signage. Well, this is just a nondescript building out in the middle of nowhere. It had the logo on it, had some chillers on it. What could be in there? It's just some batteries. We're talking about signage. We've also assigned a threshold of 3 kilowatt hours. And just to put that in perspective, Chief Abbott mentioned that this was a 2 megawatt facility. You know, it's pretty good size, but what they're talking about now is much bigger. But we still need to be worried about that smaller installation as well. So we've got an established threshold of 3 kilowatt hours. We talk about large scale testing, you know, have their engineers show us when they come in with a design that this is gonna mitigate an issue, which is also part of the analysis is a failure analysis. We're talking about forensic analysis. That was something else we learned. We injected ourselves in the investigation, and I would say hats off to Arizona Public Service. They allowed us to be in the room for several months. And there were some conversations that we weren't privy to, but we had the general overall feel of what's going on. We could report back to our neighbors in our jurisdiction of where are we today? What do we know today? Where are we going to go tomorrow? Another issue that became apparent was when with the discharge of the clean agent, the detection of smoke, the normal management of this container was to shut it down, to isolate it from the grid, to minimizing the exposure or any further damage to nearby systems in the substation yard, which is normal. I wouldn't say that's a bad idea, but the problem is now you've got a power issue for those items that we still have in there. So we talk about battery reserves. What we also talk about is remote enunciator. We do that with fire alarm control panels already. So let's bring a control panel that's outside of the building, and so we can tell what's going on as far as suppression or protection systems. Let's put gas detection in there with remote enunciator, remote panel, so that the firefighter doesn't have to open that door until he wants to. Another part of that is ventilation, mechanical ventilation. That's hugely important. We talk about the sprinkler design. I won't get too technical. It is technical, but we talk about explosion control, defragration panels that go upward or outward depending on the installation, so that if it does overpressure, that it would be in a safe manner, that we don't injure first responders. We were involved with a big facility, a pretty good sized facility, but you may have them in residences. So we're addressing in our ordinance, we're addressing a residential installation. We talk about spacing between racks. One of the other little caveats is you may have a repurposed, maybe an automobile power system that gets repurposed into a wall mount system that supplements your home. And so we're monitoring some of the issues that have happened. I wouldn't say there's a lot of them that we know of yet, but issues where power walls are installed in garages that then present another hazard, particularly with explosions. So that's what we've done from a code standpoint. Again, we're excited to be a part of this. We embrace that we have to. It's something that we just have to do. We're trying to go to clean energy, and it's always been the issue of, well, how do we store the energy? We can generate it all day long, all night long, in a multitude of ways, but we have to be able to store it. And so that's why I find it really exciting is to, from a code standpoint, how can we mitigate that? We know that we can't prevent 100% of them. Okay, well, let's mitigate it. Let's and that's what we do. That's the game that we play in code development and enforcement is how can we mitigate, prevent what we can through education, and mitigate what we can through code. It's an emerging technology, and like I said, we just have to open our eyes to it and open our hearts and open the code book too.
Well, Fire Marshal Tanner, we really do appreciate all the work you've done, as I'm sure your department does, for enhancing the code, making our response more efficient, more educated, and heightening the safety of our industry. Thank you. Guys, we've kind of went over time a little bit. Appreciate you guys sticking around. I want to give the opportunity for everybody to say a few closing thoughts if they want. Before we do that, though, I just want to thank Chief Abbott for personally getting all this together. Thank you. You were the guy that kind of made all this happen. So I really appreciate you continuing this conversation, and hopefully it won't be the last. I look forward to having more with you. Captain Marty, you and your crew, I mean, the quick thinking, the situational awareness, the bravery, it goes without saying, man. You're really impressive on this call. Hats off to you. And if y'all could pass along to Chief Ruiz and Captain Claire and his crew, thank them for the sacrifices they made and for their response as well, and for allowing us to peek behind the curtain and kind of see how this whole thing went down and learn from it and grow from it. So thank you all very much for that. And if you have any closing thoughts, feel free to let those out.
John, I'll give you last closing thought on that. The International Association of Firefighters is working on developing training curriculum for the battery energy storage systems. So that's going to be tied in with Underwriters Laboratory, UL. So working jointly on putting together a curriculum for us as firefighters. So it'll be written by firefighters for firefighters, which is the mantra of the International Association of Firefighters, the Hazmat Training Department. It's always been that way, and it'll continue to be that way. But what we have to remember too, and we've kind of talked about it, we're just now catching up with fire code for technology that really started to develop back in 2012, 2014, before the fire code even knew or we even realized this technology existed. So that kind of goes back to the saying I've got, technology follows Moore's law, where speed and storage, all the capacities generally will double every 18 months. Our ability to recognize it and know about it and then have code changes that keep up with it moves at the speed of government. So we're not able to stay on top of it as much as we'd like. The different kinds of energy storage system, whether it's a flow battery, sodium sulfur batteries, lead acid batteries, go on down the line of the various technologies that exist. We're just now starting to catch up with it. But as we catch up, they're going to make advances that we'll be unaware of until the next time an incident happens. So that's why firefighters need to be ever vigilant in watching what they're getting into and looking for the signs and telltale signs of these storage systems that are becoming more and more prevalent.
Are there any other educational things you guys want to talk about? And to Chief Abbott, to your point, when the IAFF gets that curriculum developed, please shoot that over and we'll post it on the extras pages connected to this episode and make sure we're sharing that with the masses. You guys got any other educational opportunities or resources for people out there?
Don't overlook the lithium-ion batteries that the hobbyists have in their garage, in their home, and so on. We've actually had several fires that have been caused, and typically the problem has been when they're charging or discharging. So I would caution you, and I know this is it's much smaller, but we know what the gases are that are generated when those burn. Particularly investigators, when you're in a garage trying to figure out what happened, if you find those batteries, you better have SCBA on, because that gas, that hydrogen cyanide, all those byproducts are still there. So just a word of caution, and maybe it's a hobby store, but those lithium-ion batteries, they're all over the place.
Chief Tippett?
Well, on behalf of the NFFF, we just want to thank you guys for the time and the knowledge that you're sharing with us today. I think this will go a long way in educating firefighters out there all over the country, career volunteer, large metropolitan departments, small volunteer departments that may or may not have thought about these, all the way down to the lithium-ion batteries in the remote controlled cars and everywhere else they're showing up. It doesn't take a lot of hydrogen cyanide to knock you down. It doesn't take a lot of hydrogen cyanide to put long-lasting effects on your health. I think all the points that were raised here about codes are going to have to move faster to stay up with technology. If we study history, we know that the human reaction to technology is not always all that great. When you go all the way back to when motorization first took place, people couldn't anticipate how speed impacted that. And we had people getting run over by cars running into each other. You move into the next generation, all that stuff comes into play. As the late Chief Brunacini used to say, we're not really the first responders, we're the last responders. So when technology fails, when codes fail, when humanity fails, we're the ones that have to show up to pick up the pieces. So taking a page out of the captain's response to this, risk management is critical. You got to get as many facts as you can, sort them out. Don't be swayed by some of the emotional impacts, and do what you can to take care of your people so that you mitigate these events and send everybody back for their next call. So again, thank you very much for sharing this. I think we're going to be coming out with another episode that's going to be very influential to making firefighters safer overall.
And that'll do it for episode 6 of After the Fire podcast. Thank you so much for checking us out. If you like what you see and hear, please leave a comment wherever you consume your podcasts. We really appreciate that feedback. It helps us grow, helps us be better. We also want you to join our community on all the social media outlets. Check out the clips that we're posting on YouTube, and all the extras that we talk about in these episodes, they're on afterthefirepodcast.com. Once again, that's afterthefirepodcast.com. You can also sign up for our newsletter there. Just put in your email and we'll keep you posted on all the latest stuff related to the podcast. After the Fire Podcast would like to thank this entire panel for all their time and contribution. We really do appreciate it, guys. We also hope that Captain Claire and Justin Lopez make a full recovery, and that someday they too may want to share their story with the podcast. We want to thank Chief Abbott for getting everybody on the same sheet of music for this virtual discussion. Thank you very much, Chief. We want to thank Fire Marshal Tanner for his enthusiastic approach to code enhancement and for bettering our industry's response and firefighter safety. Thank you very much, sir. Also, a big thank you to Captain Marty and his crew for their examples of quick thinking and bravery. It was truly an honor to cover your perspective on this podcast, sir. Thank you. We also want to thank Captain Claire and the hazmat crew of Peoria FD and their chief Bobby Ruiz for sharing their perspective. Thank you all very much for your bravery and sacrifices as well. And thank you for joining us for this episode and all episodes of After the Fire podcast. Again, please don't forget, leave us a comment. We really appreciate the feedback. We'll see you for episode 7. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and we'll see you after the fire.